global health is also present in groups of women constructing more efficient cooking stoves in Asia that do not only reduce indoor air pollution, but also make better use of scarce tree resources. From the seemingly simple beginnings, global health broadens its reach to affect the prosperity and stability of whole nations, whether empowering communities to better educate and provide for themselves, stopping a rapid outbreak of illness, preventing famine, or eliminating socially and economically devastating diseases. Having access to basic needs of water, sanitation, hygiene, and shelter are issues of human rights, not just issues of development and engineering. Providing these basic rights in a sustainable manner is critical if we are to improve the health among poor people afflicted with disease, people who are often isolated, forgotten, ignored, and without hope. If you examine engineering closely, it is about solving problems. Engineering is also tied to eradicating poverty and disease, just as much as it is tied to planning, design, and construction. One key, though, is to provide engineers and others with resources so they understand the beneficial use of appropriate technology. And that, I think, is key there, to understand the beneficial use of appropriate technology. We already kind of touched on that a few minutes ago, but that seems to be really a key part of what we do. This type of technology is developed and deployed with ongoing input from local communities to accommodate economic, social, environmental, and cultural conditions unique to each locale. Such an approach holds greater promise of fostering healthy communities and reducing gender inequalities. One principle of the Carter Center is that people improve their lives when provided the necessary skills, knowledge, and access to resources. What is special about this book is it provides all these so that people can improve their lives, families, communities, and their countries. I'm proud to see much of the knowledge of this book created by Peace Corps, sanitation engineers, many people, blah, blah, blah. Like the child in Mali, she has been an inspiration to me. Only after global health is improved, we will all be connected in a world of peace and equality. Okay, sorry, I probably shouldn't have just skipped a little bit. Okay, so what are your first thoughts reading that? Anything just come strike your mind, like idea, thought process? Okay, nice piece. Sounds like the book is a good one, right? Glowing review there. So what is good? Can anybody define good for me? It's a tough one. Seems like it should be real easy, right? Yes.
Maybe like something that is beneficial to a large group of people, regardless of like certain characteristics that they might exist in.
So something that's beneficial to many people, essentially.
What about the minority?
Okay, well, a minority would, that's not, many people is not precluding the minority, right? But, so you're thinking maybe it should be to everybody.
Ideally, but...
So ideally...
Yeah, like an ideal.
Okay, so maybe, so there's a question here, and again, let me just remind us, we're here to learn from discussion and talking, so there's no thoughts that should be ridiculed. We can evaluate opinions, we can evaluate ideas, but we're not here to shame anybody to impart judgment or anything like that. So we're safe to share stuff here. This is all good. Any argumentation is great because it's on ideas, not on the people, right? So so there's a caveat here about kind of what about everybody? Does it need to be just many people, or is something good only when it applies to everybody? Is that kind of the question, or okay? I'm gonna shut this door because it's a little easier. any thoughts on that? That might not have caught your comment all the way.
Yeah, it's just like, it stems from the whole like tyranny of the majority thing from like founding fathers' time.
So something that is good for some people, that might not be a net good because if it's harmful to others or if it's unfair for others. So there's a question of fairness in some sense, right?
Yes.
Can something be good without being fair? So I've got some yeses. Would it be a good thing if I gave one of you $100?
It'd be good for the person who needs it.
Right? Would that be bad for other people?
Not necessarily.
How do you choose who is the hard?
Does it matter? Maybe I like your hair, you know? I don't have $100 in my pocket. I might have $1. And suddenly now I'm doubting, like, okay, how am I going to choose? How do I do that fair? But it's interesting, right? Is how does fairness play into that, right? That I don't have a specific agenda or target where this discussion goes. By the way, I like to explore it, and I'm already enjoying like this, you know, the thoughts and challenges here. Okay, so in terms of like, let's say an action, what defines that me giving somebody money? Like, what is good about that, or potentially not good about that, right? So for an action to be good, yeah.
Has value.
Okay, has value to somebody, right? Yeah.
Could be your intent in the action.
Okay, so intent there. So the intent itself might be, you might be considering that as good, right? I'm trying to help, let's say. So that could play a role in terms of, you know, if we're evaluating somebody's action, their intent probably matters. Like, the outcome will matter in a sense, in perhaps evaluating whether or not we should take some action, but to have that intent is a great thing, right? And again, kind of our common theme here is we're all agreeing that our intent is to help, essentially development, help specifically water and wastewater treatment for the class, right? But generally, when we're talking about development, that is the intent, is to help develop, help progress people, improve their lives, essentially. So that intent of the action could matter. Yeah.
What if the intention's like not good, but the action's still good?
So there's a good question. Is an action good if the intent is not good, but the outcome is good, right? So,
Yeah. It's like the people who like do volunteer work just for show.
okay. Good. No. This is, I love it. This is great.
I grew up in a Baptist church.
Okay. So.
No shame to the Baptists. I'm still friends.
Yeah. No. Again, we're here. No. There's no hating. We can poke fun, especially at groups we've been involved with. Let's say, right? I think that's fair to poke fun at a group you've been involved with, or you know well. We're gonna take these comments for fun and not for like being mean, right? That
Right.
we can be adults about this, and laugh about it. Okay, so no, but that's an excellent question, right? Do we define it as good if people are just doing it for show? And yes, it happens to have a good impact. You know, so that intent is kind of plus or minus. Like, how do we evaluate that intent versus the outcome?
But I guess the better the intent, or the more true the intent, the better the outcome probably will be.
Yeah, so those are probably, hopefully correlated, right?
Right.
You intend to do something positive, and hopefully it's not hurting, right? Yeah.
I think like an interesting case here would be like DDT, which we learned about last semester, is like the intent was great to like, prevent malaria and, help people in developing countries who struggle the most with malaria. So that was a good intent, but then it did help in some ways with the malaria, but it also created this horrible pollution issue and killed off tons of species and, ended up hurting people in the long run as well. So
Right.
that's
So-
kind of like
So that's a very excellent case there. So intent was there. Some of the outcome was positive in terms of preventing people's deaths from malaria, let's say. So I'll give that 2 pluses, but then we also have minuses because it killed a lot of species, and it was obviously the Silent Spring was largely an outcome from that. And so how do we measure the outcome? How do we weigh that, right? So if we knew that the Silent Spring was going to happen as a result, perhaps we wouldn't have taken that type of action, right? Perhaps it would not be ethical or good to do so, and so changing it. However, what if that was the option we knew could save lives? In my view, and I've given this some ethical thought. We're going to talk a little more about ethics next time, but it seems like an animal's life must be valued under a human's life, ethically. Now, we should, I believe, value animals' lives, particularly because people care about them. That's my thinking. Even if I don't particularly care about a particular animal, I should care about the animal on the grounds that there are many people that do, if nothing else, right? That's kind of my take on it, and I'm not saying I dislike animals, I like animals, but that's my thinking on that. So overall, the DDT case, another interesting thought experiment there. So was that good? Maybe some aspect was good, maybe some of the outcome, not all of the outcome. What else on what is good? Maybe, well, what is evil then? Like, can we contrast it to what is bad or evil? Like, is that a way to define it?
I think evil primarily comes down to what the intent is.
Primarily the intent. Okay. So for evil, you can have an evil intent. You want to harm somebody or something, and that's just essentially we can call that evil pretty straightforward, right? So that would be evil. Yeah.
I think something could be not good, but not evil. Like it
Yeah.
could be not good for not.
So you can have something bad that's not evil, right?
Right.
So me putting evil and bad here just to kind of question how do we define good, right? That's probably not the best way to do it. So we could say can be bad but not evil. So good can be defined in sort of a moral sense, good versus evil. Also could just be like a state of being, like an amoral, non-moral type of thing. It could be good to have clean water. It's not evil to not have clean water, right? It would be evil to inflict contaminated water on somebody intentionally, right? That would be intent. But it's not necessarily evil. I mean, you just have to call nature evil if you're going to go there, because some groundwater is naturally contaminated, right? So that doesn't really make sense. Okay, so, well, what would we say in terms of like a human development kind of context? How do we describe things that are bad? Like what about bad things, conditions, diseases? What's bad about them? Yeah.
So when I think of like good versus bad, like one way to think about it is where your expectations lie. So if something is good, I feel like that exceeds my expectations, and if something is bad, then it doesn't. So with that application to developing countries, maybe there are expectations or needs that are not met, and that's what makes it bad, or conditions bad.
Okay. So expectations are playing a role. What about cases where the people might not know what to expect?
Like they never know
They never know that daily struggle with diarrheal disease is not normal, perhaps. So they don't know
Maybe
that.
they didn't expect to have diarrhea that day, and so they had a bad day because they had diarrhea.
There you go. Yeah, no, I'm not discounting your point here. I'm
Yeah.
exploring further because I like that idea that a lot of times we define, day to day what made it stressful or what made it a good day or bad day, good week, bad week. I think expectations are critical in that sense, and you can probably, just life tips sort of thing. You could probably give yourself a better life by managing your expectations carefully. Not to say to just across the board reduce your expectations, but giving them critical thought and adjusting them. You might be a happier person just by trying to take a step out of yourself and saying well, what would be a good expectation given all that I've got on this week, or going on. Yeah.
I think people who don't, like you said, aren't expecting anything better or worse. I think change in general, if we go somewhere and change their lifestyle, at first, people would not be comfortable with it. So it wouldn't be anything, it wouldn't be bad, good. It'd just be it's a weird level.
So change is in some ways uncomfortable, and uncomfortable may be a bad thing, but there's often a lot of opportunity with change, right? So, if I were to draw this up as good on one side, bad on the other, we might say discomfort is a bad thing, and on the flip side, opportunity tends to be a very good thing. Right? Okay, so what are other ways to describe, you're just saying, a change occurs. There's some stuff to that. Well, if you're thinking about going and making a change, we hear that phrase all the time. Make a change, or that, make an impact. Well, what about that? How can we describe the situations that are bad that we want to improve? What about them is bad? What is bad about dealing with diarrhea every day? Specifically, not too many details, but what about life is then bad or something? Yeah.
It affects your health, safety, and welfare.
Okay, so health, safety, and welfare. Plus discomfort. Okay, so what about those, can we be a little more specific about, what does it mean for your health to be bad? Can we define that even a little more in depth? So it's essentially altered away from your normal is one way to, I think, what you're saying, right? So abnormal, or so maybe limited or less than kind of what you expected to be able to do that day, kind of, yeah.
It's taking away from the time that you have to either improve yourself, educate yourself, work,
Yeah.
or chill.
And that right there is something huge I was planning to bring up in a few minutes, is the reduction in time it might be the best way to define prosperity or lack thereof, actually. We'll come back to that. That's an excellent point. So time taken, because you could spend it on so many things, whether it's free time, whether it's time with family, whether that's time for education or to work, all of that time taken is a big deal. Especially, it could be time off of your life. You might die younger. You might the time spent sick is kind of time that's just wasted in some sense. And that, in some sense, that's bad, right? We can identify that as, that's bad, that's not good, right? Yeah.
I think they get overarching thing too for evil bad. When I think of that, I think of selfishness and kind of something that's in the interest of few, to disadvantage of many.
Okay, so that's a good thing to think about right there, right? So the self-serving at the cost to others, right? In some way, it would be naive to think that people are not inherently self-serving, at least for their basic necessities, and probably just as a generic disposition. I think a lot of faith systems kind of have that, or deal with that type of a topic, right? So, in some sense, we expect part of that, but when it's done, maybe in excess, or maybe specifically at the cost of others, we identify that clearly as bad, right? So that that self-serving, especially at cost to others, and it can be especially bad or impactful when the person doing the self-serving is capable of doing so because of their authority or their power, and it becomes tyrannical or something like that, right? In some way, we like to have a system that can deal with this in a positive manner. I would like to be able to hire a plumber to deal with a plumbing issue in my house. They're going to be self-serving, wanting to get paid, and I'm happy to work with them to do that, to do something I don't want. We're both self-serving in some sense, and it's good to have the capability for society to deal with that sort of thing. But certainly there's a lot of problems that can come up with that. Anybody online want to? I mean, I can see you if you contribute, so please do if you have ideas here. All right, so then anything else on good? In some sense, we can contrast it with what's bad, right? Any more clarity there? Yeah.
How about like the hygiene and the health? I mean, if you have good hygiene, good health, and that'll help you physically, mentally, everything. You'll be more productive and kind of like Gloria said, you'll have more free time to work and improve yourself.
So generally, having the health and the time and sort of capabilities, just having that is a good thing, and specifically to avoiding the health issues, the discomforts, those things, is a good thing. So something that can avoid health problems, or avoid disease. Something that helps to avoid it might be a good thing, right? At least in developing sense. Yeah.
I think keeping everyone educated and giving them information, if we are gonna go in and do this, I think it's ethical to explain what we're doing, and if our intentions are good, but we notice there's a problem, giving them that knowledge initially as soon as that happens, instead of trying to hide it so we don't look bad, just keeping everyone involved that's involved.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one thing you mentioned there was education, and I think that applies to exactly what you were saying. That specific case of doing an intervention and kind of considering the ethics of what people actually want and things like that. We will discuss that a lot further next time. So excellent points, but also just education generally. So I'm gonna write that here. So education, that obviously applies to the people that might be trying to help, right? And it also applies to anybody lacking education. Just education generally is a good thing, right? And so the other side of that was, again, coming to that intent and watching for those outcomes. So that sort of feeds back in there for the people engaged in a community, for example. Any other thoughts, comments? Yeah.
Maybe just honesty and genuinity.
Yeah. So being honest. So honesty. You are respecting somebody by being honest. You are. So that, and you said being genuine. If you're being genuine with people, you are putting yourself at some risk because you're vulnerable, and you're doing that in some sense for their sake, so they can know you, they can trust you better that way. On the flip side, deceit, so deceiving, we often deceit or deception would be something we often see as evil. It's reducing the amount of truth in the world in some sense, and that's so you might, especially on the moral sense, but I think almost always correlating on just a kind of an amoral sense. If governments, industries, agencies, whoever, if there's more deceit, there's more dishonesty, there's going to be more bad outcomes. Whereas more honesty, transparency, all that tends towards better. Okay, so kind of reflecting back then on our foreword here, world peace was mentioned as kind of sort of an assumption, right? So peace falls under the general umbrella. It starts, that's the first word is peace, and it comes back to it in a little bit. So is world peace a good goal? See some nodding. Depends on how it's executed, right? Yeah, if you have to execute something, then, or someone, that's probably not good, right? No, that's it. That's good. Thoughts? Yeah.
I love the irony of world peace being brought up by like U.S. president.
Yeah. One of the top military forces in the world and the commander of it. Yeah, well, peace is great. Right.
I think it's a good goal, but with bad and good, they coincide. So things are going to be bad before they're good, or they're going to be good before they're bad. So to achieve that, I think there would be some bad.
Yeah, so it's a good goal, but to achieve it, is it reasonable, right? That's the next part of my question here. It's like maybe, in some way, maybe it's not. How many of you had siblings growing up? Okay, most of you. Any guesses as to where I fall sibling-wise? Want to guess? Go for it. I do have.
Huge family box, like a lot of siblings.
You're guessing that?
Yeah, I'm guessing like 5 to 7.
Why is that?
Just your general vibe.
Okay.
No, I'm not guessing that, or
Only
like
child.
none, or only child.
Okay.
No,
Maybe
it's
about
like
only
Middle
child.
child.
No, not middle, not middle.
What?
Not middle. Okay.
You have one sister.
One
One
sister.
older sister.
Okay. This is great. Really great engagement here.
I think you were an only child, and then you have like half and step siblings somewhere along the line.
Okay.
What
This
is
is very curious. Any other guesses?
I think you're the oldest.
Oldest?
Like 3.
Okay. So it turns out, first guess was pretty much right on target. I have 6 siblings.
Wow.
3 of them are older, and 3 of them are younger. I am the middle kid, and the one that's just younger than me, we fostered to adoption, and so we're actually compact, really close in. It's probably why I bet I'm giving a lot of you vibes of like kind of middle ground, seeing all perspectives. I think that's one of my strengths. I hope that's kind of something I'm conveying, and I think that's a lot to do with my family thing there. So, yeah. So it was a fun childhood, especially the age range was actually a lot shorter than you might expect. It's like 9.5 years between the oldest and the youngest. First 2 are twins, so my mom gave birth 5 times in 9 years. It wasn't like that crazy. That's a lot, but it's not 7 in 9 years, right? Anyway, so all that to say, if you had siblings, would it make sense for the parents to force sibling peace at all times? Right? It never makes sense, right? They have to. I'm not saying nations have to go to war or anything like that, but in some sense, if you're going to like play God, maybe asserting world peace, right? That how it's input, maybe that's not going to be ethical, right? So there's something interesting to think about there. Is like, how do individuals get along? As nations, how ought we to expect to get along? Coming back to expectations, like, you know, there's probably more to it than just that. So that was, yeah, good to know that that's how to get everybody engaged in in class. Now, and I totally get it if, you know, the person I am up here, talking a lot, being in front of everybody, that probably should give some oldest sibling or only child vibes because I'm up here and it at least would appear that I like to hear myself talk, because that's my job. I don't actually. I had to teach 3 classes per day a couple times last semester after VJ left. I was so exhausted every Tuesday, Thursday. Like, I need a week to recover, and I've got to teach again in a couple days. Okay, so I totally miswrote O there. Okay, so anyway, yeah.
Okay, and along what Sammy was saying about like how it's a good goal, like whenever we were like back in the 60s, whenever we pushed the Great Society agenda and stuff, like it's kind of like we have this goal of like, you know, an ideal place where there's no hunger and you know all
Right.
that. So like it's a good goal that produced some really good policies. So like ultimately it does come down to having the expectations that we can do something, that we can have a better place to live for everyone.
Right, right. So there's a lot of value in having high ideals, right? And we can learn a lot from having the high ideals, but it's not always the case that we should go to every length to implement it, right? So high ideals. So I'm just going to say, but cautious with implementation. In some sense, I guess what we're saying is like it. Even though, like, if you think about world peace, for example, it seems like something you just pursue is all you got because it's just good, right? But what we're kind of coming to here is like, it is important to think of the practicality and the implications of that pursuit. So it's possible for some good, noble intent to go too far and to take over, and you get there's different villains in the, you know, media, like, you know, movies and stuff that you've seen before that probably are that way. Most people, in fact, that you might have thought of as evil probably don't see themselves as evil. That, to me, I think that's pretty rare. If somebody's acting evil, it's probably because they're self-deluded, thinking that what they're doing is good or for the greater good, and justifying it or something like that.
Thanos.
Yes. I happen to have an image of Thanos in the next slide. You're one slide ahead of me. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to comment on was that the last sentence in the foreword said, "Connected in a world of peace and equality." So speaking of that, actually, you know what? It's this slide, sorry. Okay, so thinking about that, connected in a world of peace and equality, what we don't want is, like you said, Thanos to show up and to force something to happen, right? You don't want, we want peace and equality in so many ways, right? It's such good things, and there are so many problems with inequalities, right? We can all agree on that, and we can all agree that as all of us in this room are very affluent compared to the world's average, and we can see that a disparity, and we ought to, and we do see it, and we're a bit moved, like, oh, what can we do about this? Like, what went wrong with society? What went wrong with this, you know, this specific individual or case? You have something to say? Or?
Yes.
Yeah, go on.
I was just gonna say, I think that it gets tricky when you think about like helping people, because going to war to help a country out would technically be a good thing. I mean, helping people is a good thing, but then that doesn't help with war peace, because you're just served.
Yeah.
War bonds. So like you don't know whether helping would be a good idea or not.
Right. How to evaluate when helping is a good thing, and especially if there's costs you can identify, like wars, for example, a war to help a country escape tyranny or something like that. You know, that those are massive costs, people's lives at stake. You know, and how sure can you be of the outcomes, and are they going to be sustained? Are they going to be good? All of that. That's a great point there. So again, that kind of the reasonable, the the costs are so important to evaluate, right? The other thing I was going to say is like with Thanos in mind, so the spoiler alert, yell at me now if you don't want a few years old Marvel spoilers. Essentially snaps the finger, half the universe's population disappears, right? Dies. So like it's actually a very much a environmentalist type of thought process that some environmentalists have taken, right? It's, oh no, the world is going to run out of resources, we better control the population. Snap the finger, there you go. That's a villain, right? We can see that, and it's a kind of a neat exploration of that because you're just, you know, and of course he's probably thinking, well, the fairest way is at random, right? 50%. Maybe that is the fairest way, but it's still, we see it as evil, and I think rightly so, because it's that tyranny, right? It's forcing it on people, it's doing so much harm. So what if your intent is good in that case, like that you've taken that measure, you've murdered this many people or whatever. The other thing I'll say is, you know, as children with as many family members as I had, my mom would often say, don't count your M&Ms. And she would say that because if we all got some sort of a treat or whatever, let's say M&Ms, it was almost never M&Ms, but you know, you get the point. If you're all counting them, oh, he got 4, I got 3, like this is not fair. The point was a little bit like life's not always going to be fair. Like it's going to happen if you're always sitting there counting your M&Ms. You're just going to be causing trouble for everybody. That was kind of that message. You wouldn't want for everybody to then have to have just one M&M because one person got one. And you don't cause equality that way, and it's not necessarily right to steal from others to redistribute, but there's all sorts of ethics and philosophy with that kind of stuff. So rather than equality in terms of a Thanos equality, I think what we want is an equality of opportunity. That's again one of these high goals, these things we want. We want for everybody to have the potential to be here in the EVET program that's the best in the world, right? You know, we would want for that for everybody. Well, we see that we don't have everything that everybody else has, or that some people have. You could always kind of look up. You could decide to be jealous and all that, but what we want is just improvement, right? And the best way to improve, I think, is improvement of opportunity. I think that's at the core of so many reasons why inequalities are bad. So if we think of the bad things, if you can, you know, if we're aiming at equality, careful of the costs, that opportunity is the excellent way to go, right? If that makes sense. I have a little bit of a rant, and I don't think I said it exactly what I wanted, but Thanos has got me covered here. Okay, so then what is prosperity? We kind of already touched on it. This is what I was leading to earlier, but thoughts on prosperity?
Like having the free time to be able to use that time however you want, whether that's like making a lot of dollars or doing things with your family, or like working on your property, all that.
So free time to pursue life, liberty, and happiness, right? That's excellent. What else? Yeah.
Growth, whether it be self-growth or monetary growth or
Okay. Yeah.
growth.
Yeah. Growth. That's excellent. Yeah. The means to grow, the opportunity to grow, right? So opportunity seems to be a big one, right? If you think about a community that's really suffering, you'll almost always notice, well, the individuals in that community are very limited in their opportunities. There's very limited growth. There's very limited ways to move up in a social ladder or an economic ladder, right? That's almost always seems like the ability to grow across dimensions like that is what's really important. You know, I think I would rather be in a civilization where you can grow, you can be mobile across these things, than you're just stuck where you're at. Even if where you're stuck is pretty decent, I would rather that freedom to move, and yes, that means I might move downwards, but I think that freedom is probably better. Okay, enough of my opinions. What else? Yeah.
Maybe like the need or the desire to even do it. I feel like if that makes sense. Like if you don't have any drive to do it or like a reason to be prosperous. I don't know if that makes sense.
So in some sense, the opposite of prosperity is to be in a state of depression where you don't even have the motivation or the desire there. So that could be one contrast there to say to be impoverished. One aspect might be to be depressed or to be is a word, not quite discouraged, but apathetic is close. You know, so things like that might be the inverse. I like that.
And then it's probably linked to like the opportunity point. Like
Right.
you don't have the opportunities to even see what your potential could be,
Yeah,
then you don't have that motivation the same way someone who does see their opportunities.
absolutely. So, and that's a huge thing about opportunity in general is the ability to see that opportunity. So, or identify it as one. You might have lots of opportunity, but you've got a very limited mindset, and so that mindset is then limiting. So that might be a point at which to intervene, for example. Yeah.
And then I'd say health, comfort, and safety.
Yep. Anything else? Yeah.
Just like, I don't know, like, obviously all these are right, but also reading them is like a little bit, like, disappointing in a way. Because I think the idea of prosperity is like so above and beyond. This is just like, you have time and you like want to do stuff and you can and you're like, okay. Like, I feel like this is somewhat baseline and so, I don't know.
That's interesting. So you're kind of struck by the fact that these are very basic elements that maybe you already have, but whenever you think about prosperity, like I want to prosper, and you're thinking like really kind of high-minded type of stuff, right? Like living on a yacht or whatever. Like, I don't know. Like that's what we might have some impression of prosperity. So that's good. I think that's probably a good thing that these are striking you that way, because in some sense, this is probably what it would mean for somebody in a very destitute situation. This would certainly be prosperous, right? And I think it connects with ourselves if we do have like that free time, and maybe resources as well to pursue something we want to pursue, right? Maybe you want to take up some new habit and join some group that does that thing and does that activity. It costs something every month or whatever. If you have the resources to do so and the time to do so, maybe that's part of it. But do you feel like it's like maybe we're missing something here, or?
I mean, I would add like connection to a community. But I think
Yes. Community. Yeah. And family. So related there. Yeah.
I agree with Catherine, but I will say the community and family, in the sense of a developing country, I feel like they already have that type of stuff, like community and family and happiness. I feel like that's pretty baseline as well. Like, they don't know what they don't have, but I would say first the baseline would be like just basic human rights and like sanitation and hygiene. Then you get to a certain point, and then once you move past that, then you're prospering. Like you start technologically advancing and stuff like that.
Yeah. And so, let's see, I think you said something there. So human rights is definitely, in some sense, some of these are necessary to even have, like human rights is actually tied into the freedoms, free time and freedom to pursue, so we could add freedom here, that encompasses the basic human rights.
Yes, it's kind of like you have to have those human rights in order to have that free time.
Right, in order to actually be free, right? That's so freedom there is actually really critical. You had something?
Oh, I was just gonna say, I feel like it's just unique to everyone. Like, I feel like to us, it may be very different. I mean, all of our opinions are gonna be different on what prosperity is, but it's gonna definitely be different to someone in, say, like a low-income area or in a developing country. Because to them, like, the fact that they get to live another day, that's prosperous. Like, that's a goal to move towards. I feel like I just think it's unique to each person.
Right, so it's like that freedom, or potentially free time in a sense, for what you need in your life, right? There's definitely an individual
Like, to me, I
component
would
of that.
love to go get a facial and a massage. That would make me very happy. But like,
Right.
to someone getting like a good meal in their stomach, that's like what makes them better or more whole or more valuable. You know what I mean?
Right, and in some sense, it's like what are you in particular concerned about, and what are you in particular interested in? Is that individual aspect is absolutely critical. Monica, you got something?
Yeah, like if you think about prosperity, like yeah, these are like baseline stuff, but for people in third world countries or developing countries, like it has to do a lot with education and how they grow up.
Yeah.
Like for us, it might be like, oh, this is just like random normal stuff, but for them, it's more like, I don't know, the way they grew up, like their culture, their education.
Yeah. So what they seek in terms of what they want to do with their time or what they want to do with their life is definitely influenced. And education is one thing you could definitely define as part of prosperity, but even just what they want may be influenced by education and culture as well. So how we define that. You had last comment or two? Something else?
Maybe like access to resources,
Yeah.
so like water, clean air, clean soil.
Absolutely. Yeah, and maybe even abundance in some sense, like the access to resources to do what you want. In some sense, resources. So one thing that I wanted to say, and we already kind of got there a little bit, is we can potentially boil all of this down in a way to time saved. And this is actually a concept from, I think I mentioned the book last time, The Rational Optimist. There's a excellent foreword in that that kind of defines prosperity in some sense. I'll take a look to see if I can get that posted for you as well. But essentially the argument is that all of these things that we are concerned about with life, we can boil down to how much time are you able to pursue or to free up. If you're sick, that's time wasted. We talked about that. If you die early, that's time eliminated. That's anti-prosperous. If you have a dishwasher so you don't have to spend so many hours cleaning dishes, or a washing machine and a dryer, you don't have to spend so much time on that stuff. So, and if you look in history, there's something that you can see that's a lot of history, pretty much every society employed some sort of forced labor, slavery, various degrees of awfulness in all of that. But once we were able to have technology that could start saving us time, that's when, we like to think that we've, as a society, progressed beyond enslaving other people. I think it's actually technological, because people are still kind of people. I don't think morally we really evolved so much in a few hundred years. I think it's actually technological it became totally unethical or obvious or no, it was never excusable, but it was the way of life where if you wanted to be prosperous, you had to save time by making somebody else do it, right? Not justifying that in any way, but that was the reality. So you would save your time by making somebody, hopefully paying somebody else to do it, right? So ugly truth there. It's hard to come to grips with thinking that, you know, any of us today could be those same people, slave or enslaved, anything. Thankfully, we have technology. Just recently, I bought a Roomba. I am now just cleaning out its dustbin every now and then. You know, just started using it. It was like a Cyber Monday sort of thing. Bought and finally got around to putting it in. Now I'm not vacuuming so much, so I'm more prosperous now. At a cost, but you know, it's my little slave robot, and that is a good thing, right? It's saving me time. We had a comment.
So if like prosperity is saving time, maybe like we time and we can save technology and stuff like that, but we buy technology that is made through labor that's been slave-like conditions, is it possible to have prosperity without taking advantage of other people?
So that's a great question, and ethical kind of a moral dilemma there, right? So if that Roomba was made on the forced labor of somebody else, is that really prosperity? And that's a tough question. You know, in the 30 seconds I have to reflect on it, my initial thoughts are, in a way, I don't think it's quite right to hold me responsible for it because the entire society is built that way, and it would. You know, the alternative, I guess, is I could use my vacuum, which also probably has the same things, or my broom, which also probably has the same conflicts, right? Or maybe I can use my hands, but that's not very practical. You know, and so in some sense, we are so enmeshed that perhaps identification of that problem is important for me as an individual. This is making me a little bit more prosperous, you know, a little bit, and then. Thinking globally, we see a problem there, and as a net, I think the world progresses with technological progress. There are more opportunities. Fewer people are going to be willing to be doing that labor at dirt cheap costs. Hopefully, there are fewer countries, and hopefully, consumer countries will stop purchasing from countries that do that. That would be ideal. But again, that's not really in my hands directly, aside from I can have this discussion with you guys, and that's a little bit of progress at least, right? That's a great question. Applies to so many aspects of our life. All right, any last thoughts? We'll pick up with global health and then ethics next time, and then next week we'll probably get into more technological tech stuff. I'll probably post a reading, so check Moodle. It'll probably be kind of like today. I may shoot you an email highlighting it. I'll see you on Wednesday.
That's the same as you said, Apple.
Oh, yeah. So I'll probably be like 8 different